Behind that iconic red scanner and sleek black exterior lies a treasure trove of bizarre production secrets that would shock even the most devoted Knight Rider fans. From mysterious anonymous phone calls and train derailments to Volkswagen Beetles disguised as Trans Ams and dashboards sculpted from styrofoam by a toymaker, KITT's journey to television stardom was anything but ordinary. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Knight Rider's 1982 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am, KITT. Fact 1. The mysterious anonymous phone call. The story of how Knight Rider got its first 3 Trans Am sounds more like a spy thriller than a television production deal. On the morning of Friday, April 16, 1982, Eric Dahlquist, the president of Pontiac's West Coast Public Relations Agency, received one of the strangest phone calls of his career. An unidentified man asked if he was speaking to the president of Vista Group, and when Dahlquist confirmed his identity, the caller delivered a cryptic message that would launch one of television's most iconic cars. The mysterious voice said, "Be at the PMT lot this afternoon at 4 p.m. There will be 3 black Trans Ams there with the keys inside. Take them, they're yours," and then immediately hung up without any further explanation or identification. Chuck Koch, who was Vista Group's vice president of client services at the time, later described the entire situation as very cloak and dagger, comparing it to something out of a deep-throat meeting. What made this even stranger was that there was no paperwork involved, no official documentation, and no one at the Pacific Motor Transport lot even spoke to them when they arrived. The 3 men simply showed up at the designated time, found the 3 brand-new black Trans Ams sitting there with the keys inside exactly as promised, got in the cars, and drove away as if the vehicles didn't officially exist. To this day, decades after Knight Rider first aired, no one has ever discovered who made that phone call or why they chose to handle the delivery in such a secretive manner, making it one of the production's most enduring mysteries. Fact 2. Pontiac initially rejected the show. Before KITT became one of the most recognizable cars in television history, Pontiac almost passed on the entire opportunity because one executive thought the show would be a disaster. When Eric Dahlquist first approached Pontiac about featuring the brand-new 1982 Trans Am and Knight Rider, he sent a proposal to Jim Graham, who was Pontiac's sales promotion manager at the time and had authority over movie and television product placements. After reviewing the concept of a talking, crime-fighting car, Graham sent back a rejection that shocked Dahlquist, who had successfully placed GMC pickups in hit shows like The Rockford Files, Chips, and The Fall Guy. Graham told Dahlquist that he thought Knight Rider was silly and corny, and even worse, he compared it to My Mother the Car, an infamously terrible 1965 NBC sitcom about a man whose deceased mother is reincarnated as an automobile, which had become shorthand in the industry for terrible television concepts. Graham believed that associating Pontiac with such a ridiculous premise would damage the brand's image rather than help it, so he turned down the placement deal entirely. Fortunately for Knight Rider and for Pontiac, other people within the company disagreed with Graham's assessment. Dahlquist had already been discussing the show with various Pontiac employees and dealers who were enthusiastic about the placement, and he had even mentioned it to Bill Hoagland, Pontiac's general manager, who was impressed with the concept. Through persistent lobbying and support from multiple departments, including sales, marketing, engineering, design, and influential Southern California Pontiac dealers, the project eventually moved forward despite Graham's initial rejection, proving that sometimes the best opportunities are the ones that almost got away. Fact 3. KITT's dashboard was made by a toymaker. One of the most futuristic and technologically impressive elements of KITT wasn't designed by automotive engineers or computer specialists, but rather by a toymaker with a background in creating props for low-budget movies. Michael Sheffey, who worked at a pattern-making shop and had experience designing toys and movie props, was brought in by producer Glenn Larson to create KITT's elaborate interior, specifically the wild computerized dashboard that would make the car look decades ahead of its time. Using his expertise in creating three-dimensional objects from unconventional materials, Sheffy sculpted the entire dashboard out of styrofoam and fiberglass, rather than using traditional automotive materials or actual electronic components. According to David Hasselhoff's autobiography, George Barris's company was commissioned to streamline the bodywork, while the dashboard was specifically customized in styrofoam by Sheffy, who treated it more like a theatrical prop than an actual functional automobile component. The dashboard was designed to look incredibly high-tech and advanced, featuring a maze of faux screens, mock digital readouts, and fake buttons that appeared to control KITT's various features, but in reality, none of the gadgets or gizmos actually functioned. Sheff created fiberglass dashboards that were fitted over the original Pontiac Trans Am dashboards, transforming the standard interior into something that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. He also designed KTT's unique steering wheel, which he built from scratch using a two-part urethane foam, creating the distinctive yoke-style wheel that became one of the car's most recognizable features. Years after the show ended, Sheff's original designs became so valuable to Knight Rider fans that he generously lent his original schematics to replica builders, helping preserve the legacy of his toymaker's approach to creating one of television's most iconic automotive interiors. Fact 4. William Daniels requested no credit. The actor who brought KITT to life with his distinctive voice tried to keep his involvement in the show completely secret, but his plan backfired almost immediately. William Daniels, who was already a respected actor known for his work in films like The Graduate, and who was simultaneously starring as Dr. Mark Craig on the medical drama St. Elsewhere, made a specific request when he agreed to voice KTT. He asked not to receive any on-screen credit for his role. Daniels took the job as a favor to producer Glenn Larson, recording just a few pages of lines in a Universal Studios recording room for what he thought would be a short-lived detective series featuring a talking car. And he figured the session would be quick and easy. When NBC bought the series and asked him to continue as the voice of the car, Daniels agreed because it was a nice extra paycheck that would only take about 90 minutes of his time per episode away from his main job on St. Elsewhere. But he specifically requested no billing because he figured no one would recognize his voice and associate him with what might turn out to be an embarrassing project. In his own words, Daniels said he took no billing and figured no one would know, but he was completely wrong about remaining anonymous. The day after Knight Rider premiered on September 26, 1982, Daniels was taking a walk in his neighborhood when a stranger standing on his lawn across the street yelled out, "Hey, congratulations on your new show." Daniels was stunned that someone had already figured out it was his voice, mumbling some kind of acknowledgement that he hoped combined gratitude with embarrassment before hurrying on his way. 30 years later, people were still recognizing his voice as that of the Trans Am on Knight Rider, and Daniels admitted that he was apparently the last person to know that his voice was such a distinctive signature that he couldn't hide behind anonymity even when he wanted to. Fact 5. Train derailment saved the production. A transportation disaster that could have been a tragedy for General Motors became the unexpected salvation for Knight Rider's entire production. After Glenn Larson received an initial order from Universal Studios for 22 episodes following the successful pilot, the production team quickly realized they had a serious problem because they only had 3 Trans Ams to work with, and the show's scripts called for KITT to constantly perform jumps, drive through walls, and ski up on 2 wheels, which meant they would destroy cars at an alarming rate. Car jumps had become extremely popular after the Dukes of Hazzard hit big in 1979, and going back to Pontiac for more brand-new Trans Ams wasn't really an option since the car was now in high demand at dealerships and Pontiac was riding a wave of success. Then, on November 11, 1982, a train loaded with new Camaros and Firebirds came off the tracks in Selma, California, just south of Fresno, while bringing the cars to dealers throughout the state. Several freight cars filled with Firebirds had landed on their sides during the derailment, and although some of the cars weren't damaged very badly and were still in pristine condition with only a few bent or nicked up in the accident, state law prevented GM from selling vehicles that had been involved in such an incident. When Chuck Koch heard about the train derailment, he immediately saw an opportunity and contacted GM about acquiring the damaged cars for the show. General Motors agreed that the cars were in too good of shape to just crush and decided to donate them to Knight Rider, selling the production 10 to 12 Firebirds for just $1 each, which solved the show's desperate car shortage and allowed them to create a fleet of stunt KTTs for the duration of the series. Fact 6. Most key ITTs had to be destroyed. The deal that saved Knight Rider's production came with a devastating condition that still haunts collectors and fans today. When General Motors sold those 10 to 12 damaged Firebirds from the train derailment to Universal Studios for $1 each, they included a specific legal requirement that would determine the fate of these cars long after the show ended. Because the vehicles were considered damaged goods that couldn't legally be sold to the public under state law, GM required that all of the cars obtained from the derailment had to be destroyed once their use on the show was completed, ensuring they would never end up on the road or in private hands. The studio honored that agreement, and when Knight Rider was canceled after 4 seasons in 1986, Universal brought in a wrecking ball and systematically destroyed most of the KITT cars that had survived the rigorous filming schedule. Out of approximately 20 to 23 KITT cars that were built for use in filming the series over its 4-year run, only 5 original screen-used vehicles are confirmed to still exist today. The destruction was particularly heartbreaking because many of these cars had survived 4 seasons of brutal stunts, jumps, and crashes, only to be intentionally demolished when they were no longer needed for production. The surviving KITTs that escaped destruction have become incredibly valuable, with some residing in museums while others have passed through private collections, and each one represents a rare piece of television history that almost didn't make it. Some reports suggest that David Hasselhoff kept one of the original cars, which he later sold at auction for $300,000. But the authenticity of various cars, claiming to be original screen-used KITs, has become a subject of debate among fans and historians, since more cars have been sold as authentic originals than were actually built for the show. Fact 7. KITT was almost named TAT. The name that became synonymous with television's most famous talking car almost didn't exist because the original acronym sounded awkward and didn't quite work. In the earliest drafts of the Knight Rider scripts, the advanced crime-fighting automobile wasn't called KITT at all, but rather TAT, which stood for Trans Am 2000. This naming choice made sense from a business perspective since the show was trying to promote Pontiac's Trans Am, and including the car's actual model name in the acronym seemed like a logical way to reinforce the product placement deal. However, as creator Glenn Larson worked on developing the show, he quickly realized that TAT just didn't roll off the tongue as well as it needed to for a character that would be speaking in every episode, and would need to be called by name hundreds of times throughout the series. The acronym felt clunky and awkward when spoken aloud, and it didn't have the snappy, memorable quality that would make it stick in viewers' minds or become part of popular culture. Larson decided to rework the concept so that the car's name would be tied to Knight Industries instead of Trans Am, which also made more narrative sense within the show's fictional universe where the vehicle was built by the Foundation for Law and Government. By changing the name to Knight Industries 2000, Larson created the acronym KITT, which was much easier to say, more memorable, and had a friendlier sound that worked better for a character that was meant to be Michael Knight's partner and companion, rather than just a vehicle. The 2000 designation remained to indicate how futuristic and advanced the car was supposed to be, and KTT became the name that would eventually be recognized by millions of fans around the world who never knew how close the character came to being called by a much less catchy name. Fact 8. A Volkswagen Beetle doubled as KTE. When Knight Rider needed to perform the most dangerous and destructive stunts, the production team didn't risk expensive Trans Ams, but instead turned to one of the cheapest and most adaptable cars available in Southern California during the 1980s. For jumps that required KITT to really catch some air, or crash hard into or onto something, the team needed a vehicle that was more rugged, significantly lighter, and especially much cheaper than the Trans Ams they were already going through at an alarming rate. They couldn't just replace Trans Ams or Trans Am parts like candy after all, so they came up with an ingenious solution by building what the production team called the Flivver, which was essentially a lightweight KITT replica constructed on a Volkswagen Beetle chassis. Volkswagen Beetles had been converted into dune buggies and sandrails for years, and were proven to be great at doing jumps and landings while taking all sorts of abuse, making them the perfect foundation for a stunt car. That needed to survive impacts that would destroy a regular automobile. The production team essentially created a sandrail based on a VW Beetle, and then covered it with a rubber shell body that was molded to look exactly like KITT's distinctive appearance, complete with the modified front end and signature styling. These rubber shells served a dual purpose because they not only protected the actual KITT cars from getting dinged up during regular filming, but they also formed the entire body of this Beetle-based version that could handle the really dangerous stunts. When viewers watched KITT soar through the air in those spectacular jump scenes, many of them were actually watching a Volkswagen Beetle in disguise rather than a Pontiac Trans Am. And because the rubber shell looked convincing enough on camera and the jumps happened so quickly, audiences never noticed the difference between the genuine Trans Ams and their much cheaper, more expendable Beetle-powered stunt double. Fact 9. Stunt drivers hid in the back seat. Creating the illusion that KITT could drive himself without a human operator required some creative camera trickery and an uncomfortable hiding spot for the show's primary stuntmen. For scenes where KITT appeared to be operating in auto-cruise mode and driving without anyone in the driver's seat, the production team couldn't simply tow the car or use remote control, so they had to find a way to hide a driver in plain sight. Stuntman Jack Gill, who performed many of KITT's most impressive driving stunts throughout the series, would actually sit or lie behind the driver's seat and operate the vehicle using controls that extended through the seat where he couldn't be seen by the cameras. The production team installed a two-way mirror made of dark glass that acted as a barrier between the front and back of the car, allowing Gill to see out through the glass so he could steer and operate the vehicle safely, while the camera and the audience looking from the outside couldn't see him hiding in the back. Whenever Michael Knight would say into his wrist transmitter, "KITT, come get me," that was Gill's cue to drive the right-side blind drive car to the designated location, and then David Hasselhoff would jump in on the left side and take over using a second steering wheel that was installed on his side for normal driving scenes. KITT was never seen driving for long periods of time in full self-driving mode because of the difficulty and danger of shooting it this way, and the production team had to carefully plan these sequences to make them work within the limitations of having a hidden human driver. In some other scenes where a towing cable might have been visible to cameras, KITT would be literally towed by a truck in a way that was filmed, so viewers couldn't tell that the car was actually being pulled rather than driving under its own power. Fact 10. The dashboard only worked on one car, the elaborate high-tech dashboard that made KITT. Look decades ahead of its time was actually only fully functional in a single vehicle out of all the cars used during production. The so-called Hero car was the only KITT that contained the complete intricate dashboard with all of its buttons, screens, and detailed displays that viewers saw in close-up shots throughout the series. All of the spare cars that were kept on hand for various purposes, including the stunt cars, jump cars, and driving cars, either had completely blank dashboards or greatly simplified versions that wouldn't be recognizable as KITT's interior if cameras got too close to them. This meant that anytime the show needed to film a scene that showed the dashboard in detail, they had to use the Hero car specifically, which was reserved for close-ups and shots with David Hasselhoff where the interior needed to look perfect. To make matters even more complicated, the production team also created a separate stationary mock-up dashboard that was used on a sound stage specifically for extreme close-up shots of the voice box or other buttons that needed to be featured prominently in a scene. This mock-up allowed them to get detailed shots without having to bring the Hero car into the studio or worry about the limitations of filming inside an actual vehicle. Universal eventually learned to do all of the modifications that were needed across their fleet of KITTs, but the fully functional dashboard remained exclusive to that single hero car throughout the show's entire run. The fiberglass dashboards that were fitted over the original Pontiac Trans Am interiors in the other cars were purely cosmetic and designed to look good enough from a distance or in quick shots where details wouldn't matter, but they couldn't withstand the scrutiny of a close-up camera focused on KITT's futuristic controls. Fact 11. The scanner was copied from Cylons. The most iconic visual element of KITT's design wasn't an original creation, but rather a direct tribute to another science fiction property that shared the same creator. Glenn Larson, who created both Knight Rider and the original Battlestar Galactica series, specifically asked designer Michael Sheffey to create a beam of light for the front of KITT that would look exactly like the scanning eye that the Cylon warriors had in Battlestar Galactica, wanting the talking muscle car to have a distinctive heartbeat that viewers would immediately recognize. The front-mounted scanner bar, which the show called the anamorphic equalizer, was designed as a fiber optic array of electronic eyes that swept back and forth with that characteristic red pulsing light that had become associated with the robotic Cylons. John Ward, who had worked on Battlestar Galactica, was brought in to design the hood with the LED display, which required removing part of the Trans Am's hood to build it in, and the modification affected the engine, but ended up making the car look absolutely incredible. Glenn Larson openly stated that the scanner was a reference to the Battlestar Galactica characters, and KITT even reused the exact same iconic audio sound effect for the Silent Eye scanner, making the connection unmistakable for fans who were familiar with both shows. To make the scanner fit properly, the Pontiac's nose was eventually extended slightly during the design process, giving KITT its distinctive front-end appearance that set it apart from a stock Trans Am. In Knight Rider DVD audio commentaries, Larson addressed fan speculation about deeper connections between the two shows by stating that they had nothing else in common and that he simply reused the scanning light for KITT because he really liked the effect and thought it would work perfectly for the car's character. Fact 12. William Daniels never met the cast. Despite being one of the most important characters on Knight Rider for all 4 seasons of the show's run, the actor who brought KITT to life worked in complete isolation from the rest of the production. William Daniels recorded all of his dialogue for KITT in about 90 minutes per episode, working alone in a recording studio long after most of the filming had already been completed. And he famously stated in 1982 that his duties on Knight Rider were very simple, taking about an hour and a half to complete, and that he had never met the cast and hadn't even met the producer. This unusual arrangement meant that David Hasselhoff had to film all of his scenes talking to KITT by working with an assistant who was off camera and would read KITT's lines during filming, giving Hasselhoff something to react to, and then Daniels would come in later to record the actual dialogue that would be used in the final episode. The two actors worked on the same show for years without ever crossing paths during production, which created an amusing situation when they finally did meet at the show's Christmas party. According to Daniels, when Hasselhoff encountered him at the party, the Hoff said, "You son of a gun, how long does it take you to do it?" And Daniels replied, "About 50 minutes." Which prompted Hasselhoff to express his frustration that he was out in the road and in the desert sweating, while Daniels could knock out an entire episode's worth of work in less than an hour from the comfort of an air-conditioned recording studio. The fact that Daniels was simultaneously starring on Saint Elsewhere, which aired on the same network as Knight Rider, made it easier for him to record his KITT dialogue quickly, without having to travel far or significantly disrupt his schedule for the medical drama where he played his main role. Fact 13. Super Pursuit Mode was a shell. One of the most spectacular visual effects introduced in Knight Rider's 4th and final season was actually achieved through clever deception rather than advanced engineering. When KITT entered Super Pursuit Mode, which was supposed to allow the car to reach speeds of 420 miles per hour, Through improved rocket boosters, retractable spoilers for aerodynamic stability, and movable air intakes for increased cooling, viewers saw the Trans Am transform with various body panels extending and retracting in a dramatic sequence. However, no long shots of KITT are ever seen changing into super pursuit mode while the car is actually moving, because KITT was completely stationary during those transformation scenes. The production team created a special shell version of KITT's body that had no engine, no running gear, and no room for a driver inside, because the entire interior space was filled with large hydraulic rams that were needed to articulate all of the moving body panels that deployed during the transformation sequence. This non-functional shell would be positioned in one location, and the hydraulic systems would extend and retract the various spoilers, air intakes, and other aerodynamic elements while cameras filmed the impressive mechanical display. The show would then cut to stock footage of a regular KITT driving at high speed to create the illusion that the transformed car was racing down the highway at incredible velocities, when in reality, the transformation and the driving were two completely separate things filmed with different vehicles. George Barris, the legendary car customizer who had styled the TV Batmobile, was brought in to design and build these Super Pursuit Mode versions of KITT, working with Jay Orberg through Barris Customs to create the specialized cars for this final season feature that was added in an attempt to boost ratings for the struggling show. Fact 14. Skid plates were visible in jump scenes. Even though KITT was supposed to be virtually indestructible, with his molecular bonded shell protecting him from any damage, careful viewers could sometimes spot evidence of the very real protection that the stunt cars needed to survive their dangerous jumps. Due to the requirements for mounting cameras on the vehicles and providing protection for the undercarriage during hard landings, the production team had to install skid plates underneath KITT that would prevent damage when the car came down at severe angles after launching off ramps. These skid plates were necessary equipment because without them, the stunt cars would have been destroyed on their first or second jump, but they created a problem because they were sometimes visible to cameras during the big jump scenes, breaking the illusion that this was an invulnerable supercar rather than a modified Trans Am that needed extra reinforcement to handle the abuse. In some of the larger jump scenes, if you watch carefully, you can actually see the skid plate underneath the car as it flies through the air or lands, especially in episodes that have been remastered in high definition, where details that were invisible on old CRT televisions become clearly visible. The show tried to minimize this problem by cutting away to another angle, such as showing Michael Knight driving from inside the car before KITT actually landed, which helped hide the moment of impact when the skid plate would be most obvious and when the front end of cheaper fiberglass jump cars would sometimes visibly crumble from the hard landing. Viewers watching on modern high-definition televisions can catch these little production failures much more easily than audiences in the 1980s ever could, revealing the tricks and compromises that were necessary to create the spectacular stunts that made Knight Rider so exciting to watch. Fact 15. George Barris didn't create KITT. One of the most persistent myths about Knight Rider is that George Barris, the legendary car customizer who created the 1960s Batmobile, was responsible for designing and building the original KITT, but this widely believed story is completely false. According to Chuck Koch, who was directly involved in the production, Barris had absolutely nothing to do with the original design or creation of KITT, despite many rumors to the contrary, and despite the fact that his publicity machine encouraged this belief over the years. The actual design work was done by John Chinella, Pontiac's chief designer, who sketched out KITT's appearance on a cocktail napkin during a meeting with the show's producers and then provided detailed drawings that would guide the modifications. The physical modifications to transform the 3 original Trans Ams into KITT were performed by John Ward at his shop in Agua Dulce, California, which took 6 weeks to complete, while Michael Sheffe designed and constructed the elaborate interior dashboard that made KITT look so futuristic and high-tech. George Barris only became involved with Knight Rider much later in the show's run, and even then his contribution was limited to helping with what Sheffy described as a slight refresh of the cars for the fourth and final season. Some reports do credit Barris with creating the Super Pursuit mode version of KITT and the convertible version that appeared in Season 4, which would explain why his name became associated with the show. But he had no involvement whatsoever in the iconic original design that made KITT instantly recognizable and turned the black Trans Am into a cultural phenomenon that would be remembered for decades after the show ended.